everyone, and welcome to our skilled nursing webinar today, which we are calling Gettin' GG with It, breaking it down step by step. My name is Ken Bell. Thanks so much for joining us today. So today we're talking about the impact of Section GG and the new CMS expected GG discharge outcome scores. So go ahead and put on your shoulder pads, get out your parachute pants. It's time to break it down in the new world of GG. And I got to give it to Amy with QRM for coming up with a great theme, and Stacy as well, because it takes us right back to the 90s for those of us who grew up in that period. But in the next hour, we're going to reveal how you can accurately capture not only baseline GG scores, but the additional MDS information that CMS is going to utilize to determine your expected discharge outcome scores. There's a lot of mystery around that. We're going to hope to demystify that today. And we're also going to provide a sneak peek of Simple's new functional score reporting, which will help you monitor your community's performance on those measures as well. So Simple, that's us. We're excited to be your host today. And as you might know, Simple now serves over half the SNFs in the country with data solutions for referrals, reimbursement, regulatory compliance, and software solutions for those important tasks. And we're excited to partner once again with QRM for today's training, and we will let you know a little later in the session how you can get more information on both Simple and QRM. So before we get started, just a couple of quick notes. Handouts are currently available to download. Sam has posted a link in the chat, so you can download those in PDF format. I see tons of people checking in from all over the US right now. We're really excited to have everyone with us today for this super important topic. And we are expecting to go about an hour today, including Q&A, and we do have a huge audience, so it's unlikely we will be able to answer every question, but please feel free to ask your question at any time during the webinar, and then Stacy's going to address as many of those as possible during our Q&A section at the end. And QRM also has committed to follow up with an FAQ document for any of those questions we miss. But again, Q&A will be at the end. You can post a question at any time. One thing though, please do us a favor and use the Q&A button to post your question, not the chat button. If you put it in chat, it's easy for us to overlook, but use that Q&A button and post your question there. So now I'm going to go ahead and introduce your speaker. Your expert today, I think it's on the next slide, is Stacy Hallisey. Stacy is the Senior Vice President of Integrity and Quality Improvement with QRM. She has a broad leadership and educational experience in the SNF world, as well as engagements with professional and lobbying associations. She is an expert in value-based care and is also great at breaking it down, pun intended, the difficult concepts of clinical compliance and all about GG, which is why we're here today. And then also with us, he's not on your screen, but Ethan Tain is our Senior Solution Strategist for Simple. Ethan's been with Simple for over a decade now. I lose track. He's been with us for so long, but he's an expert in all things SNF data compliance related, and he's in charge of our SNF data solutions. So later in our presentation, he'll share our newest GG function score reporting functionality from Simple. So you're in good hands with this team and these experts. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Stacy to get us started.
Thanks, Ken. I really appreciate it. Appreciate being asked to speak on the call. And as Ken said, my official name is Stacy Hallisey, but in keeping with today's presentation, I'm going to go by Stalo. I've adopted my rap name, so you can call me that. And then just also, I'd like to say I am a survivor. I'm a survivor of salary-based, cost-based reimbursement, RUGs 34, RUGs 44, RUGs 48, ACOs, bundles, ICE SNPs, OBRA, DRGs, PDPM. And what that really means is that I'm old enough to have a reference to something that happened in 1997 with the title of this presentation. We were talking about, doing a presentation on GG, and my brain instantly went to getting jiggy with it. And so I came up with the getting GG with it. And someone on our team asked, well, that's a pretty old reference. I'm sure. Are you sure the audience is going to remember that? And I went, oh, it can't be that long ago. What was it? 5, 10, 12 years ago? And I looked it up, and this song was popular with Will Smith For any of you who are really young, this is Will Smith pre-slap on the Oscars, but it was in 1997 that this song came out. So 27 years ago. So I apologize for the very old reference, but it is what it is. So be prepared. You're going to see a lot of bad 90s song references. You're going to have some probably PTSD from some of these outfits that are on this page, but hopefully you guys will get a lot of tidbits and great information that we have sprinkled throughout the presentation. So if you're ready, I'm ready. So we want to make sure that we go over just everything behind the GG, the high, the why behind the expected GG discharge score. I want to talk about how CMS is going to use this discharge score. Learn some best practices. We've obviously been doing GG for a while, but especially, with a heightened attention around it last year, converting on October 1st, go over some of the best practices that we've learned, and then really talk about some tools and resources that we've been able to gather since that time. So it seems like forever ago again that we've been using it, but if you think where you were last year about this time, everybody was, looking forward to October, or I don't know if they were looking forward to October 1st, but anticipating October 1st. And we knew kind of what was happening. We knew that G was going away and that GG would be replacing it. We knew that the QMs would change. We knew that the CMI calculations are going to be changing for states that do case mix. And everyone was attending, every training, that they could get their hands on, reading everything about it. But from October to now, we've heard from a lot of our clients and just a lot of people in the field is that they need more training. And people are saying, I still don't know it like I need to know it. And I think there's almost 7,000 people that signed up for this presentation. So if you think there's 7,000 people out there that are wanting to get more information on GG, this is probably a very timely presentation because it's not as easy as it seems. So today we're going to kind of retrain, refocus, reemphasize on it. And again, with possibly 7,000 people on the call, there are people that will be brand new to long-term care even since October 1st of last year. And then we'll have veterans in the field that understand my reference from 1997. So this is gonna be a little bit basics, then we'll get into a little bit more detail. But I hope no matter what level you are in your experience level, that you will be able to find some information and be able to take some pearls of wisdom with you. So in a nutshell, if we talk about what is the expected GG outcome score or the functional status, and basically in a nutshell, if you want to put it in your elevator speech, this is what CMS thinks the patient's functional status will be when they terminate their Medicare A stay in a SNF. So that's it in a nutshell. Now, it's obviously CMS never does anything that simple. So what it really is like, if you just ask somebody like, how would you measure functional status? You'd probably come up with a ton of different ideas, but this calculation is only 11 specific items that CMS feels are indicative of the important functional levels at this point in time. Doesn't mean they might not change down the road, but at this point, they're only looking at 11 particular items. And then they also have to put it through a risk-adjusted algorithm, again, that only CMS could come up with. And thankfully, we have Simple who's helped decode that, but that's what it is. It's here's the outcome. Here's what we think you should be functioning at when you leave your skilled Medicare A stay. So the fact that they, made such an emphasis on it and did, made it such a focus and got rid of section G, they're going to be using it for a lot of different things. So right now they're definitely using it in the QM calculation. So every place where they use G, now they're using information from GG. They're actually using this section to compare your actual discharge scores to your expected discharge score. And then we all know that when CMS puts something in place, sometimes it starts out as just a measure to measure, and then it turns into something bigger than that. So right now, it's definitely can and will impact your 5-star rating, the SNF quality reporting, the value-based purchasing. It's definitely going to impact, reimbursement and census as well, since this is your scorecard, facing to the community. And there will be managed care companies that will choose to do or not do business with you based on your outcome score. So it is a very critical piece. So if you can see they're using it for all these items, it's really important and we have to get it right. So that's, we don't have the option of not really paying attention to it. And so I talked a little bit earlier just about what goes into calculating this GG outcome score. And there are, again, 11 specific items. And I have a slide and a couple that's actually going to show you which 11 they are. And then there's another term that is very critical in calculating this. It's usual performance. And again, it sounds like a very generic term. And according to CMS and the RAI manual, it is a generic term. Their definition of usual performance is how the patient usually performs. So in no other word can you define the word using the word itself, but it seems to be how they're doing it here. And then just a little caveat, this is not to be confused with the items that are used on section GG for the PDPM ADL outcome scores. ADL reimbursement scores. Only CMS could come up with two different things that they measure using the same section on the MDS, and they wonder why we're confused. And then how it's going to be used is, so now if you're looking at the QM itself, so the first thing they're looking at is just the discharge score. So they tell you what you expect you should be. Now the QM, the quality measure, is going to be the percentage of patients who actually achieve that predicted outcome score. So it's not going to be a cumulative, like you add up everybody's admission scores and add up everybody's discharge scores and their expected scores and see if they get it. It is every single patient. So for example, if your expected outcome score is 47 and you get 48, then that's a yes, you beat that one. If it's a 46, you didn't. And so it's going to be the number of patients who got it. So again, you have to get everyone right in order to achieve that functional outcome score. So it will be the percentage of patients who actually achieve the predicted outcome score. So that's really, really important to remember. Now the item set that is used is, again, this is what CMS feels are the important functional status items for the patient. So it's eating, oral hygiene, toilet hygiene, the ability to roll left and right, lying to sitting, sitting to stand, chair to bed to chair transfers, toilet transfers, the walking 10 feet, walking 50 feet, or wheeling 50 feet with 2 turns. Now, you'll probably see items on here that you might have included if you were going to come up with the calculation for determining the functional outcome scores. And it's kind of funny because my OT friends say it best. They're like, it's great that you can eat, transfer, and walk, but see what people think when you're doing it naked. So there isn't any dressing scores on here. Again, doesn't mean that we're not going to address that in therapy and that it should be goals for the patient and it's important. It's just saying for this functional outcome score right now, they are only looking at this particular set of items that they have determined. So now in order to come up with how if we break that down even farther and what goes into making those determinations. So one of the first sections on section GG is actually the prior level. And this is a critical data point because if you can imagine, in order to predict how you're going to be, it really would make sense to know your starting point. So getting that prior level accurate is very important. So step one is even looking back into the hospital notes before somebody's being admitted. And I know everybody has different packages they use and getting pre-admission notes, etc. But really being able to scan through that and look at any hospital notes. A lot of times you're not going to see that in the physician's notes. You might see that in social service notes. You definitely, if they were seen from therapy in the hospital, therapy always addresses that in their notes. So you're going to want to make sure you get a hold of those notes. Talking to the patient, if for some reason the hospital notes are incomplete, patient shows up, definitely interviewing the patient, family, caregiver, etc. And then we know patients come from other skilled nursing facilities, and it might actually be having to call that other skilled nursing facility and get that information from them. But the amount of energy that you put into this cannot be understated because, again, it's a critical data element of predicting your outcome is based on your prior level. So put a lot of energy into getting that one correct. And then the second step is actually scoring their admission score. And I think everybody knows you use day 1 through day 3. It is coding their usual performance. And again, it's very different than the old G section where they told you it's the rule of 3. Here's some exact things how it needs to be coded. This just says, tell us how the patient usually does over the course of those first 3 days. One little caveat, it is prior to the benefit of intervention. And their official statement is that prior to the benefit of intervention, that would have changed the outcome of the patient's stay. So we really have to make sure all the staff understand what that means and what does that mean prior to the benefit of intervention. And on some later slides, I actually have some examples to walk you through that so you can see how you would possibly make that determination. And then step 3 is scoring that patient on their usual performance the last 3 days of that skilled Part A stay. So again, a lot of emphasis around, again, getting the prior level right, getting that admission score correctly, and then getting that discharge one correct. If I've seen anything in practice, I see people focusing a lot on that admission score and understanding the importance of that. That discharge one kind of sneaks up on people, and there doesn't seem to be the same amount of energy and effort in making sure that that's an exact scoring. So keep that in mind if you're thinking about looking at your practices as well. It's like, what can I do to make sure all of these are correct and getting that information. So now to the secret sauce. And again, the Simple team has done a great job and they're going to speak to that. Ethan's going to speak to that a little bit later and going to go through more of the details on this. But again, I think if all of us were to come up with our own discharge score and we would say, well, you'd have to take this into consideration. You can't just look at each patient's different and, a 65-year-old person's completely different than a 92-year-old person. So CMS did think of that. I give them credit for that. They really did put some work into that. Not every patient is exactly the same. So there are some exclusions that will kick that data out, kick the whole patient out of the calculation. And the first one is if they have an unplanned discharge. So it's very important that the facility understands that and the team who's coding that MDS really understand if it's a planned discharge from a skilled Medicare A stay or an unplanned. So you would definitely want to make sure that you know the rules and regulations about what it takes to code something as a an unplanned discharge. And then if the patient discharges to hospice, again, that would make sense that if the plan of care has changed and you're not going to go to a rehabilitative, but you've actually made a decision to go to hospice, that would make sense that that would be excluded. And then there's a whole list of medical conditions. Again, you'll hear more about that later. And then if the patient is under 18, there are some patients who are under 18 that have, medically disabled that do have Medicare for some reason, but it's very rare, but they would be excluded. And then there are covariates. And again, that's talking about like if you guys would just come up with your own thing, you would be like, well, wait, again, 92-year-old isn't going to be the same as this person. Somebody has mental health conditions, possibly might not progress the same. Depression, again, their prior level of function. That's where I was speaking earlier, that getting that prior level of function correct. And their mobility is going to be a big piece of kind of predicting where their score is going to end up. And again, that admission score. So getting that score of where they fall upon admission is a critical element in determining what their expected score is going to be. So it's really, again, putting all that into this tumbler system, they're going to come up with a number. Now, one thing I don't want you guys to get too caught up on is trying to memorize every one of these exclusions, every one of these covariates, and make sure that you have some system in place to code every single one of them. We have to get the MDS accurate and get it correct, because this is what CMS is looking at now, but that might change again in October. So if you're only focusing on certain items right now and they change it up on you, you might miss something. So again, my big underlying statement is code the MDS accurately and capture everything, every medical condition, every comorbidity, every covariate, and make sure that MDS is a very comprehensive list of the patient and paints a really good picture, because that's going to be the one that's going to give us the best data to use for that. So again, another item, we talked about, there's only 11 of the GG items that they're using for this calculation. There's many more items on GG. Some of them count towards the PDM ADL calculation. You have to code all of them correct. Just because we're only talking about these 11, I don't want you to think at all that you shouldn't make sure that every one of those items is coded correctly. I'm going to hit the ones on this presentation that are the 11. Just from a timing point of view, we don't have a long enough time to go over every one of those, but just do your best to get every one of those coded correctly. And again, this is just a snapshot of the MDS. It speaks to the prior level of the prior functioning. And again, I can't emphasize how we have to get this right. It sets the groundwork. So again, you're going to have to do some digging. It's not going to come automatically. You might need to, again, spend some time reading the hospital notes, talking to family members, and just make sure your staff understands, that the coding criteria for this is different than the actual item set. You can see on here, a 3 is an independent, and on the other scoring, a 6 is independent. So you can't get people just in the habit of going, a 3 is a 3. You have to make sure they read it on each particular item set, and they're using the coding criteria for each section of the MDS. So again, make sure they know that. Making sure we really understand the mobility, the prior function of the prior status of the patient, and how that person usually performs in these items. And again, you can interview the patients here. It's completely, you should be interviewing them and asking them how they were able to do during that particular activity. And then on the prior device, they really, again, that makes a difference of if a patient was using an assistive device for mobility prior to their admission. So again, obviously, if the person's in a manual chair or a wheelchair, mechanical lift, just make sure everyone on your team knows that includes sit to stand, a stand assist, a stair lift, anything like that. If it's a mechanical lift, it needs to be coded in this section. Again, that would make sense. Somebody who's relying on a mechanical lift probably isn't at their highest functional level. Walkers, any type of walker qualifies for that, whether it's a hemi walker, a pickup walker, a rolling walker, a platform walker. So it's anything that falls into that walker category would fall under this particular item set. Now we get to the ever elusive usual performance. And again, this is per CMS. I won't read that to you because you can read it yourself, but really it's saying, how does the patient function usually prior to the benefit of any care that a facility staff would provide that would cause that patient to be more independent? It could be a therapy intervention. It could be nursing intervention. It's really like, what does the patient typically and usually look like while they're performing those particular activities? So the admission baseline scores, again, they're talking about how the patient functions in those first 3 days prior to the benefit of the patient getting any therapy services or any nursing services that would cause them to be more independent. And again, each one of these item sets could be different. So maybe the patient's refusing to get out of bed, but doesn't mean that they're not eating or doing bed positioning or bed mobility. You have to think about what happens if therapy doesn't start and patients admitted on a Friday and therapy doesn't start till Monday. So every patient is going to be a little bit different. So you have to look at each one of those and make sure you're coding this according to the guidelines. Again, just a real quick review of what those coding guidelines are. Again, this is really important because this is different than the old Gigi item set. And the new thing they added is if it takes 2 people to do the activity, 2 helpers, you have to code that as dependent, regardless of how much assistance each of those persons is providing. So there could be myself and another therapist, and maybe we're each only providing minimal assist, but we're just not quite sure how the patient's going to transfer yet. Maybe they have a larger BMI, and we're just like, I'm not really sure how many people it's going to take. If it's 2 people to do it, it's automatically dependent. And even if that means it's to handle medical equipment, an IV pole, etc. So we have to make sure the staff understand that. Again, if there's 2 people doing it, it's dependent. And not sure that I would want to make sure that I got it right. And a lot of times what we do in therapy, I'm not saying it's right, is that we have that second person who like wheel the wheelchair behind me. And just in case they need to sit down, I have that wheelchair behind him. If that's what you are doing, that truly is a dependent. So you might have to challenge your therapy staff. Does it really need to be that? Is that really a requirement? Because I'm not sure that would be indicative that that person was dependent if we were just doing it because it was a typical therapy practice of, well, that's how I always do it. And then you can see, again, they put in some caveats. So if the patient did refuse, obviously you need to code that, or if it's not applicable, if it's not attempted due to environmental limitations or not attempted due to a medical condition or safety. And what happened originally, I'm not saying any of you guys did that, but there were people that said, hey, you know what, we're going to code a lot of these not attempted, not applicable, not medically safe, because that's going to score the person as dependent. And when we do all this therapy and we get them better, we're going to show how much they changed. Well, that was addressed. CMS addressed that in this latest go around. And instead of coding those 7s, 9s, 10s, and 8s as dependent, they have a new term that they called as imputation. And they say, based on everything else we see in the MDS, we really think this is how this person would have been coded. So try not to use those codes unless it's really the only option for that. We really should try to assess all of these items on those first 3 days. We really should do that. There should be very few of those 7s, 9s, 10s, and 88 codes. So again, if that would be one I would look for if that's a fallback in your facility, or maybe you could really put a practice in place to make sure you're coding all of those as best as possible. So just again, real quick to remind everybody, it's eating, oral hygiene, and toileting for the 3 self-care they're looking at. Again, upper body and lower body dressings, like I said, you can eat, but you certainly don't want to do it without your clothes on in a facility. So we want to make sure that we're addressing all of these, but these are the ones that are scoring for the calculation. And eating, what I've seen on eating is sometimes people will, maybe in therapy, will, see how the person can they bring the spoon to their mouth or their fork to the mouth, or can they, drink their liquid. But what we don't do is we don't see how the patient does through that entire meal. So this isn't really just a one shot. Can they do it one time? It's can you complete the meal? So we really need to make sure that's being coded and scored on that, because a lot of times our patients get tired in between the start of the meal and the end of the meal, and the level of assist is different from at the again, from the start to the time they finish. So really make sure your staff understands that coding. The oral hygiene, again, a lot of people will think it's just brushing their teeth, but it does speak to dentures as well. And so if the person does have dentures, it is the person's ability to take those in and out, which includes soaking and cleaning those. And again, then I said in and out, but yeah, being able to do both of those activities. So all of those need to be done to code for the oral hygiene. And then toilet hygiene is being able to adjust the clothing, pre and post either voiding or a bowel movement. So it's literally, can I button, can I zip, can I do that? And then cleaning and making sure there's appropriate, hygiene in the perineal area. If there is an ostomy, it includes wiping the opening, but not changing anything. So again, as long as the staff understand what goes into each of those criteria, you'll get a much more accurate score. And then this is, again, if this is more information, when you take this presentation and you want to, hand it out to folks, it's just a little bit more. We've already kind of talked about each one of those. And then we're talking about the roll. Now on the mobility, it's rolling left to right, lying to sitting, sit to stand, bed to chair, toilet, walking, etc. So it's any of those functions that you really have to make sure we're coding appropriately. Rolling, there's a little tricky one in that. We get asked this question a lot. Well, the person doesn't sleep in a bed and they sleep in a recliner. What do I do? Well, you code how that person can roll or reposition themselves, kind of roll left to right within the recliner. That is in the RAI language. And sitting to the side of the bed, it really means you have to be able to sit to the side of the bed with your feet on the floor with no back support. Now, most of the beds go low enough that you can really accommodate somebody no matter how short or tall they are, but that is, you would want to get them in that normal position, again, without a back support, to see how they do for that particular piece of that. Another weird one on this is people say lying. It says from lying on their back to sitting on the side of the bed. There's also additional language that says use your clinical judgment. So if the person's normal position is the head of the bed is up to 30 degrees, you can start lying from that bed position and returning to that position. It doesn't need to be extremely or exactly flat, because if the person has breathing issues, lying flat, you wouldn't put them in that position. So again, just remember, or make sure your staff knows that whatever that normal bed position is for that person is the starting point. And then on the sit to stand, again, it's from any sitting surface. It can be a wheelchair, the side of the bed, a regular chair. It's just how they come to stand. And if at any time it takes two people for that activity, again, then you automatically code that as dependent. If it's a Hoyer lift, it's automatically not attempted because you're not attempting for that person to do it. You're doing it through a mechanical device. So you would code that one as not attempted. That would be a time where that would make sense to code that as dependent. And then it's set up if you only need somebody to go get the equipment. So let's say they needed a walker to be able to stand up and somebody had to run get the walker. That's the setup. That's not you wouldn't code that any other way. And then on the bed to chair, chair to bed, it's both of those items. So they don't break it, CMS does not break it down as can they get from the bed to the chair is one activity, and then the chair back to the bed is a separate one. They are all one. So you'd have to code the person as the most dependent for either one of those activities. Because again, you can't, I don't know if I said that correctly, but you can't break it down into two separate activities. So if they can get out of bed by themselves, but they can't get back to bed, then you would code them as that whole piece as they couldn't complete that activity. So you would code them how they did back to bed. The toilet transfer, again, we get asked this question a lot. A bedpan is not counted on here on a toilet transfer. Clothing management is not addressed during this piece of it. That's addressed in the toilet hygiene. And actual toilet hygiene is not addressed under this category. It is completely left to just the actual physical task of transferring for that patient. Again, just as a little bit more, just what I've talked about on there is to support that and supporting the, again, talking about the bed to chair and the toilet transfers. The walking and the walking 10 to 50 feet. Again, this is CMS's definition, so you really need to measure out 10 feet. You wouldn't want to guesstimate that because there's a big difference between 10 and 50, and a person might be able to do one and not the other. So, and this assessment starts when the patient is standing up. So it doesn't matter how they get to stand up. You don't count any of that in here. It's literally just how they do once they are standing up. If the resident needs to, well, they can take a rest while standing and that's fine. I mean, while walking. So they can walk 5 feet and have to stop and catch their breath and continue. Not a problem. If the person needs to sit, then you need to code that as activity not attempted because you couldn't attempt to walk the 10 feet. So again, that's a critical one, is to be able to complete that entire task with that without sitting. Same on the walking, the 50 feet. Again, if you have to sit during that 50 feet, you don't get to code it. You have to code it as not attempted. And then the turns can be either, 2 right-hand turns, 2 left-hand turns, left and a right. It just needs to be a 90-degree turn because they're trying to look to see how does the patient, walk in the hallway where they actually have to turn a corner. So again, makes sense. And if the person needs an assistive device, a cane, a walker, you can certainly use that. It's just their ability to walk that distance. All right, so now I'm going to turn it over to Ethan, and he's going to kind of walk through, after we've done the basics here, what goes into it, the 11 codes, the usual performance. I hit at a very high level of a covariance, but now we're going to get a lot more detail about what goes into that.
Cool. Thank you very much, Stacy. First of all, I want to apologize. I did not come up with a 90s hip hop inspired title for my slide. So if anyone has any ideas, let me know in the chat, and maybe we'll try to sneak that in. I've been learning about section GG from QRM for years now, since GG was a thing. A lot of things have remained the same, but then also every year, it seems like there's one more important impact of Section GG. And this year is probably more so than any other year. Of course, the long stay functional outcomes N028 and N035 have now switched to using Section GG with version 18. But really, the biggest change is this expected discharge score measure. So this is going to be included in our 5-star rating in the quality measures domain, short stay. It's included in VBP for, I think, fiscal year 2027 is the first period that it impacts payment. It's a big deal. And it's a big deal because of those impacts, but also because it's just a totally different way of thinking about quality measures. So we may be very confident in our short stay, long stay quality measures, understanding how the episodes feed into each quarter, into the numerator and denominator. This expected discharge score is a QRP type, really. It's included with our short stay, but it's a little bit different in that we need both a 5-day and a PPS discharge before we can even evaluate success or not. So all of our reports from CMS are going to give us some good detail, but it's going to be kind of after the fact. Looking at a situation where we have a resident who just started their PPS stay. We have a 5-day, and we want to know, what is that expectation that CMS has for this stay? It's going to be really, really difficult. It's a lot more complicated than just opening up the MDS and kind of getting a ballpark of where CMS is expecting us to be. So we're going to kind of go through 3 steps here to take the 74 data points that CMS is using to calculate this expected discharge score, try to peek behind the curtain and kind of see what's happening and how does CMS get to this expected discharge score. I get this question a lot, and I've seen it in the chat. This is not in any way related to column 2 of section GG, that discharge goal. This is something that CMS is calculating for us. And if we meet this expectation, then for this expected discharge score, we end up putting it in the numerator. So in this case, numerator is a good thing. Otherwise, it's in the denominator. So as we dig in, we're going to use this example on the left here. This is a resident that, or this is kind of pulled from our sample database as we've gone in and tried to calculate out this measure in real time. This is kind of how we're understanding it and how we're working through the expected discharge score in our system. This resident has an entry score of 21. So everything we've talked about so far gets us to this first step, right? So we have 11 items, and CMS is going to use 10 of those to calculate this entry score. Could be anywhere, each item, anywhere from a 1 to a 6. So our entry score could be anywhere in the 10 point to 60 point frame, kind of range. This resident is starting at a 21. Now, the first step we're going to do is we're going to take those 74 covariates and we're going to start with 3 of them, which are kind of like model constants or baselines. We can think of them in this way. What this is representing is for every resident that starts at a 21-point entry score, this is kind of setting the ceiling for expected improvement based on this risk-adjusted model that CMS has built. So for this resident, 26.49 points, right at 26.5 is the starting point. Now, this is not the expectation. This is the ceiling. But this is based on this model, kind of where CMS starts. If we go to the next slide, Stacy, we'll see here that if we want to think about this in kind of a plain language way of saying it, what CMS is saying is this model that they've built assumes a possible improvement of 26.49 points for all residents beginning with a 21-point entry score. Now, I've said we have 74 covariates. This is just 3 of them. So this is not where we're stopping. What CMS is going to do with the rest of these is they're going to say, well, let's take this resident's 5-day. Let's look at all of the other information specific to this resident and kind of fine tune where we go from there. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that really that's the next 4 categories. We're taking these 71 covariates and we're using those to fine tune the expectation that CMS has. So these are going to be looking all across the 5-day as things that were true prior to the current illness, true on admission, as well as the active diagnoses. And they're going to try to identify all of those factors that might, limit the that 26.49 improvement expectation. If you click to the next one, really the plain language way to think about this is that this model that CMS is created recognizes the resident's baseline functioning prior to current illness and the conditions present at admission will limit the expectation of improvement by 12.5 points-ish. All right. So not too bad. We're going to start with this entry score of 21. We're going to say, okay, this risk adjusted model, it gives us a possible improvement for residents starting at this level of 26.49. But then when we look at this individual residence detail and everything captured on the 5-day, we're going to recognize that there's, about 12.5 points less in this expected discharge score. And that's how we end up with that 34.94. Now, the next couple of slides have a lot of detail on them. We can go ahead and go to the next one. I'm not going to talk through every single one of these, but just to kind of give you an idea of what are the factors that CMS is looking at. Primary medical condition, depending on a resident's entry score, and its combination with any of the primary medical conditions from IOO20. That's going to be our first kind of differentiating factor. This resident has, you can see on the left, a negative 4.71, which corresponds to that the stroke primary medical condition category. But you can kind of see how, even though these values on the right are going to be different based on the entry score, you can kind of see, start to see their logic as CMS applies different covariates and different values based on different primary medical conditions. When we go to the next slide, we'll see the prior conditions, which Stacy was talking about kind of in depth, prior functioning, prior mobility device use, and prior surgery, as well as the admission status, right? So obviously age is going to have an impact on the expectation that we have for this resident. BIM score, continence, history of falls, all of these things, we can kind of start to see the logic of how CMS connects the way that we've coded the MDS to the expected discharge score that they have. All of these things are going to have an impact, some greater than other things based on the model that they've published. And they're going to try to get us down to an expected discharge score that is realistic for this resident. When we talk about, 74 covariates, sometimes the response that I get is, oh, CMS is trying to make this so difficult that we can't figure it out. But another way to look at it is that CMS is trying to cast a wide net to catch as many of those conditions that would have a measurable impact on the expected discharge score as possible. So they're doing us a favor in this, and the more that they're looking at, the more that they are able to capture, and the more that they're able to kind of give us a fair shake, if you want to think about it that way. Active diagnoses is the next one. Huge amount of data here. They're looking at mostly Section I, a couple from others, I-8000, any of those codes could map to any one of these as well. So it's really a broad net, like we were talking about. They're trying to capture as many of these conditions as they can so that this expected discharge score is set in a place that's realistic. The first step, apply the constants. Second step, fine tune with the resident detail. And then the last step is easy. That's the easiest part. If you can get to this point, then you really just need to add them all up. So step 3, add them all up. For this resident, we're sitting at 34.94. We go to the next slide, we'll kind of summarize each of these steps a little bit. Started at a 21. Baseline constants are telling us that the ceiling, where we're going to start, 26.49. Take all of those resident details. It's going to subtract out 12.55. And CMS is saying that, not generally a resident with a score of 21 should have 14 points of improvement, but specifically this resident, based on everything that was true on the 5-day, CMS is expecting a 14 points of improvement. So if we hit that 14 points for this quality measure, we're going to be in the numerator. Otherwise, we're going to be in the denominator. So as we get into this and we start seeing this measure impact our 5-star, hopefully it's a little bit helpful to kind of know, well, this is what CMS is actually trying to accomplish. Here's what they're measuring. Here's the data that's going into it. We go 2 more clicks, Stacy. We'll have a little bit of data from kind of what we've pulled up so far. As we are doing these numbers and we're able to look at our client base, we're seeing that over since October, on average, we're seeing an entry score right at 28. Expected improvement really close to the improvement with this example, but expected improvement of a little over 13 and an expected discharge of 41. Now, when it comes time for the PPS discharge and we see the actual, the items from the PPS discharge, we see an average 42.32, which is just barely above that expected discharge number. I think that's really interesting. As we look at the facility level quality measures report from CMS, we'll see the national average is just barely over 50%. And it kind of bears out when we look at our data that we're just barely meeting that expected discharge score. I don't know if there's what to make of it necessarily, but that's just interesting to see that kind of as we are digging into this a little bit more, it's really a coin flip at this time. Hopefully, as we understand how this expected discharge score is calculated, and as we hopefully gain a little bit of visibility into that, that's something that we can improve upon. And so that's really the job that we have now. So that's how we're going to do it. Start with the entry score, apply those baseline constants. We're going to take that down based on what's true of the resident, and that's going to give us our expected discharge score. So that's all I got, Stacey.
All right. All right, so now how do we make sure that we can do it? And again, the last few slides are just gonna be, oh, that's great. That's easy. It's easy to memorize stuff. The hard part is how do we do it on every single day? So again, we can have do the calculations and we can know what it goes into the scoring, but how do we do it? So our recommendation, and we've identified as a best practice, is that you identify a GG champion. Again, can be anybody in the facility, nursing, MDS, rehab, social services. The facility has to decide. Roles and responsibilities when we're talking about completing the section GG item sets is that obviously rehab, completing the GG item sets. It sparks a lot of controversy, but we suggest you can do that both on and off the caseload. There's ways to do that. That nursing should complete the nursing GG UDA so that they are having the documentation, and that the CNA should document every GG item on every shift. Again, these are aspirational. I said it was going to be the hard part to do, but that is what we've identified as the best practice. And then the GG champion, they would review all the notes. So if let's just say I'm the GG champion, I'm going to, and I know day 3, we've passed day 3, I'm going to review the rehab notes, nursing UDA, CNA notes, if there are RNA notes, social services notes. I'm going to talk to the patient and family because I'm going to see if what they're telling me actually correlates to the data that I'm seeing. Then I'm going to schedule an IDT huddle meeting, whatever we want to call it. There's 1,000 different names. And we're going to talk through the usual performance. And I'm going to say, well, the rehab said this, nursing said this, the patient said this. Then we're going to complete a huddle note after the IDT has agreed upon the usual performance so that we can put a summary in the chart that shows the supportive documentation to show how we decided to code it on the particular item of the MDS. So again, that GG champion has a lot of responsibility. People will say, well, this is too much work. We can't make that happen. I'm really of the belief that we can't afford not for it to happen. So we have to put some new processes in place, I think, and at the facility level. But this is what we have seen work, is really identifying that GG champion. At QRM, we developed a form really for that GG champion to be able to keep track of that information. So it lists every GG item down the side. And then if I'm that GG champion, I'm going to mark in here what rehab said they were for eating. I'm going to do what the resident said they did. I'm going to say what nursing said they did. And I'm going to take all this information back to the IDT. And then that gives us a place to talk about it, to come up with what we think is the usual performance. So again, this sheet can be can be uploaded and made into a UDA. It can be scanned and put in the medical record, but it's really there for that supportive documentation if this would get potentially denied or audited. So again, that's our recommendation for doing that. I have an example. Let's say we had a patient that was admitted Tuesday at 1 o'clock. Rehab did the eval at 3 o'clock. Patient said, you know what, I'm not going to get up till therapy, gets me up. The PT scored the GG rolling left to right as a 2 substantial max assist. But then on Wednesday and Thursday, when therapy was working with them, the bed mobility improved, and we're coding it as a 3. The CNA notes, there's, over the course of that 3 days, there's some substantial maxes in there. There's some 3s. Nursing UDA, there wasn't one the first day. The evening shift coded a 3, night shift coded a 2. And then the resident says, sometimes I can do it better than others. So what do you make of all that? Because that's probably reality. On that first admission assessment, the patient probably isn't performing consistently and the same, and they're doing different times of the day. So an example of that would be the GG champion would review the notes, and the patient varies. And the IDT decision could be patient was primarily a 2 substantial max assist, as this is what they were before they benefited from therapy treatment. So even though that was day 1, and you don't have to look at the entire days 1 through 3, because that person benefited from therapy after day 1 because therapy intervened and started treating as of that day. So the team could make the decision and they could write the note. The resident is more responsive to therapy and appears to think the nursing staff should do the work for them, causing the variance. So you can, whatever that IDT decision is, the huddle note would state that, and then it would support your documentation of taking, 4 different disciplines, summarizing that and coming up with a decision of the IDT. The RAI manual says you can use up to day 3 to determine that usual performance. It's not required. You can complete it on day 1 if it's before the benefit of intervention. You can complete that huddle note after the day 3, as long as you're using the documentation, that you're reviewing the documentation from days 1, 2, or 3. You have up till midnight of the 3rd day, so it's very normal that your huddle note wouldn't have been until after that fact. Quick little managed care consideration. Some of the managed care providers that we are seeing, they're saying the huddle note needs to be written within the first 3 days. Now, that's not what the RAI manual says, but we know some of the managed care providers make their own determinations, but the facility can make their own decision of when they want to do that, as long as the data they're referring to is within those 3 days. And our recommendation is, if you want to avoid a take back, write the note within those 3 days. But again, that is your call as a facility, is how best to determine that. Of all the suggestions, we talked about what things to do. I can tell you how not to do it. Don't rely completely on one department. This is not just an MDS role. It is not just nursing, and it's not just rehab. It really needs to be an IDT approach. You need to ensure that all your staff are trained. And again, we did a great job of training everybody before October 1st of last year. My guess is you have new staff in the facility that have started since then, or priorities have changed and we've forgotten it. But I think you have to train, and retrain to make sure that everybody gets this correct. Again, our lessons learned, MDS accuracy is key. It's really not about trying to figure out how to code around the MDS in order to, make sure that we're tricking the system. Get it accurate, get all the information there, get all the diagnosis, get all the comorbidities, the covariants, record all the diagnoses. Have a minimums of the 7s, the 88s, the 9s, and the 10s. Make sure we're coding prior to intervention. Require documentation from all disciplines. Again, it cannot be just one discipline that does this. Code discharge correctly if planned or unplanned. That's going to make sure that you're not including people that shouldn't be included. Couple of other best practices is that you put the goals on the care plan. So if That way, everybody on the whole IDT knows what you're shooting for as that goal for that patient. Report on it weekly in the therapy meeting or your UR meeting or whatever meetings you have to determine that. Make sure that you're talking about it weekly so that it is continuing to be updated and plan accordingly. Again, just make sure, well, and if anybody needs a quick click to get to the RAI manual, we pull all of our information from CMS to make sure we're giving you guys accurate information. And then I have our information on here. Amy, if you want to, and I think we have one more slide, but to open it up for questions. But again, if you want to reach out to us to any information about this or to learn more about our services that we provide for rehab and clinical reimbursement services, feel free to reach out. I know we tried to keep, we're ready to be on for more than an hour. We just know sometimes people have to drop off. But Amy, did we have any questions that you wanted to hit?
Hi.
Oh, wait,
Yes.
so I had one more thing. I'm sorry. One more slide.
Yeah.
Ethan,
Thanks.
you want to hit that one? Sorry.
Yeah. Thanks, Stacy. We're going to jump into Q&A in 1 second, but real quick, I wanted to remind everyone, just if you missed it in Ethan's part of the presentation, you might not have caught that Simple is the only place in the industry right now where you can get this level of real-time detail for these predicted or expected discharge scores. So I want to give everyone a chance to just learn a little bit more about that. So with Simple's this functionality for expected discharge scores, you can see the expected discharge scores for all your stays as soon as the 5-day has been transmitted. You can understand the impact of all 74 of those risk-adjusted variables used to calculate the score. You can identify imputed values in the section GT items used by CMS. Basically, you get a preview all in one place of exactly what you need to see for this QM. So if you're a Simple user, we've already rolled this out. We'll be providing a client webinar soon where we go into detail exactly how this works. So that'll be coming in a few weeks. If you're not a Simple client, I want to give everyone a chance to learn a little bit more. We'd be glad to provide a free demo for you as well. So I'm going to bring up a poll right now. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about QRM, this will be on your screen. You can just say yes right there. They'll be glad to reach out to you. If you're interested in getting a free demo of our function scores report, we're happy to show you that as well. And if you're already a client, you can just let us know, hey, I'm already a client, and please send me info on that client webinar. So I'll leave that up on your screen for a few minutes. And Amy's been watching all these questions as they come in. I know we've got a bunch of them now. So Amy, are you ready to go with our first question?
Yes. Yeah. We have over 100 questions. So obviously them all. But we do have a few that we can tackle right now. And then we'll follow up with that Q&A document. But Stacy, I think we need to give a quick shout out to all the nurses in the house today because it is National Nurses Week. So we just want to acknowledge that and thank you all for your dedication. Okay, first question, Stacy. What do we do if we only have therapy documentation?
Oh. Yeah, unfortunately, we see that. And for the immediate issue, you can only code based on documentation you have in the chart. You can't code on something that's not there. So if therapy is the only documentation that you have, that would be your source document. If you're seeing that therapy is the only documentation that you have, this is really probably something you should take to your QAPI meeting and have the facility and then interdisciplinary team put in a process in order to start capturing documentation from nursing, CNA, and RNA. So, but again, you can only use a source document as what is there currently. But if it's all you're seeing, you definitely need to get a plan in place to make sure you're having an interdisciplinary team approach to this.
Okay. And how do I document to all the exclusions?
Ooh. Well, as you just heard, Ethan, there's 72 of them. So if I think you're probably not going to walk away from here memorizing which each one of those are. I think the key is doing a comprehensive assessment of the patient and making sure that we are coding everything that we have the information for about the patient. Because there might be something that's not one of the 72 covariants today, but it could likely be a covariant the next go around. So I don't think we should spend our time trying to focus on, like which memorizing covariants, really making sure that, you're getting a good, complete, thorough assessment from your physician or your nurse practitioner or your PA, and that nursing's doing a comprehensive assessment, that we're reviewing the medical record from the hospital and getting all the diagnoses, and that therapy is completing accurate assessment, as well as getting information from, your dietitians, et cetera. So the more complete chart you have and the more complete information, you're going to get the right assessment at the end and the right covariance will be captured. So I think we have to focus on getting a complete medical record and not necessarily trying to memorize and document to each one of these 72 specific covariants.
Okay, and is it better to code not applicable or not medically necessary?
Ooh. They will both score as, they're going to both be used in that imputation score to come up with what CMS thinks that number should be. So there's really it's not better to code one or the other from a coding perspective. It's better to code if it's accurate according to the RAI definition. So if it didn't happen because it wasn't medically necessary, that's what we should code. If the patient refused, that's what we should code. If it's not applicable because they didn't do stairs prior to being admitted, we should code not applicable. So we should always use the RAI definitions and code to that, and then we'll always be doing it correct.
Okay, thank you. And what if I don't have any information on the prior level and the patient cannot speak, but I know that they lived at home alone? Can I code what I assume they are?
Oh, that's another good question. We get that from people and they're like, oh, well, they at the hospital, they said they lived at home before they were admitted to the hospital, but there's no real information of what that home status was like. And unfortunately, you can make the assumptions like, well, if they lived at home alone, they probably were able to do this. But unfortunately, we can't code it that way. You have to code it based on, and if you don't know, you have to code that you don't have the information, that it's not available. It's unfortunate, but that's our only option, is to code that it's not there.
Okay, and how about one more? This will be our last one. All right. Do I have to have a huddle note?
No. No, you do not have to have a huddle note. There are times when everybody's documentation in the chart is going to be exactly the same. Let's just say, for example, the patient is dependent in all of these activities. Nursing says they're dependent, therapy says they're dependent, RNA says they're dependent. So if you're coding dependent on the MDS, that would make sense. If the chart would be reviewed from a Medicare provider, a 5-claim audit, and they saw the supportive documentation that said, yep, everybody says they're dependent, that would be a case where a huddle note wouldn't help or hurt you if you didn't have it, because all the supporting documentation in the chart clearly supported why you coded what you did. Now, let's say that the patient, again, scored different in all three. Therapies coded one thing, nursing coded one thing, RNA coded one thing, and CNA coded another. And the MDS nurse just picked whichever one she thought was right and put it on the MDS. If that claim were to be audited, and you guys know the CMS is doing the 5-claim audits for everybody, and they're looking for supportive documentation, and they can't come up with any rational reason of why the MDS, why it's coded as a 2, and there's 17 other different statements on there, it's very likely that CMS will put that as an error and not allow you to claim that. So that's the case where a huddle note would definitely come back and hurt you. So if they're different scores, I would highly suggest you have some sort of note to show the IDT's thought process. If for some reason they are all exactly the same, then I think it's that in that case, it wouldn't hurt you.
Okay. Thank you.
And Amy, I know it's not a question, but I forgot one thing as I was
Sure.
going through this, trying to keep it to the hour. And as a therapist, one of the things I think we have to really focus on in therapy is making sure we're providing great treatment so the patients actually get better functionally. So there's one part about this is making sure we understand the rules and regulations and coding it correctly. The second part, as a therapist, it's my scorecard. I feel very personal that I'm going to show the world how much better we get these patients. So we really have to take a look internally as the clinicians and go, am I using state-of-the-art therapy? Am I using evidence-based practice? Am I really making sure my treatments center around practicing bed mobility, practicing, ADLs, practicing ambulation, practicing the toilet hygiene? Sitting in the therapy gym with a 1 pound weight on your quad is not going to that's not going to take us to that next level. So if you're a therapist listening, really make sure that we're providing really good, strong therapeutic programs. Make sure the patients are out of their out of their wheelchair in the gym. Get them on the mat. Make sure you're actually doing high level exercise. Get them stronger first. That's going to be the best way to improve their functional outcome. While we're understanding the scoring behind it, we can't overemphasize how much it takes to actually work with the patient. Nursing, do a walk to dine program. Make sure we're getting the people up sitting on the side of the beds. So that's my plug for being good treating clinicians.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Stacy. So we want to be respectful of everyone's time. Sorry we couldn't get to all the questions, but there were a ton of them. So QRM, as Amy mentioned, is going to follow up with an FAQ document. So we'll address as many of those. We'll publish that probably on the Simple website as well as the QRM website. We'll be sure to get that out to everyone. But I want to thank Stacy Hallisey with QRM for sharing her GG expertise today. Amy Gerlach with QRM for working on the slides and documentation, and kind of giving us this cool theme, and Ethan Tane with Simple, who took a look into the data with us. These might be the only 3 people in the industry who can make GG seem a little fun, so we really appreciate that. But we did record today's session. Several people asked about this. We have recorded it. It will be available on Simple's website tomorrow. You'll also get a link by email tomorrow that includes the slides as well. So take a look for that on the Simple blog and look for that email. But again, thanks to our experts who joined us to share their expertise. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. We had a huge audience. We appreciate your attention and your time. And we hope everyone has a great day. Bye, everyone.
Stay low, signing off.